My name is Claire Monroe. And the day after my grandmother's funeral, I found out that everything she left me was gone. Not metaphorically. Literally disappeared from her accounts, while the scent of funeral lilies still clung to my coat. I was holding one of her favorite teacups when my mother delivered the news. Her voice casual. Her eyes fixed on a flower arrangement like she was commenting on the weather. She said the market had been volatile, that Gran's investments didn't perform. I remember blinking, my fingers tightening around the porcelain, because Gran showed me the statements herself just a few weeks before. There was over $2 million. She told me she made it safe. For me, when I said that, my mother didn't even look at me. She told me not to be dramatic. That Logan, my brother, needed capital for his new venture. That the family had agreed. Family. That word made my stomach flip. I'm family too, I said. But my voice cracked. Gran made it clear. That money was for me. That's when she finally looked at me. Her smile soft but cold like a snowflake in a storm. Logan has a real shot at something revolutionary, she said. Unlike your little design hobby. I was working 2 jobs back then. Barista in the morning. Waitress at night. My so-called hobby was the only reason I was still in college after my scholarship mysteriously fell through. Where's Dad? I asked. She said he was at a meeting. With Logan's investors. I felt the teacup rattle as I set it down too fast. I asked to see the paperwork. Show me how Gran's money legally became Logan's. She said Gran authorized the transfer. Before she passed, I felt my entire chest freeze. Gran was in a coma, her final 2 weeks. She couldn't have signed anything. That's when the temperature in the room shifted. You're being hysterical, my mother said as she turned away to fix another vase. That tone, that dismissal, it cut sharper than anything else. Like I was 13 again. Arguing about why Logan never got grounded. I left without another word. Drove home. Saturday in my car for a long time before pulling out Gran's last letter. She'd promised she'd take care of me. She said she'd made sure I'd be okay. That I wouldn't have to fight anymore. 3 hours later, I stood in my parents' marble foyer holding bank statements and an eviction notice. My father wouldn't look at me. He just told me to leave. Quietly. Said I was embarrassing myself. I asked if they'd forged her signature. His silence answered for him. When I said Logan's name, my mother's hand connected with my cheek before I even finished the sentence. Her strike was clean. Practiced. The same way it had always been. She whispered, "How dare you? After everything we've done for you. Done it for me." I laughed. It came out broken. They gave me nothing but conditions. While Logan ran through every dollar like it was monopoly money, my father said Logan had vision. My mother said I needed to understand how families work. That some children are worth investing in. Her eyes dropped to my thrift store shoes. And some just take up space. She opened the door before I could answer. I stood on the porch. Surrounded by imported statues and trimmed hedges. Everything bought with stolen money. My money. Their Mercedes engine purred. The sound of comfort. Of moving on. They left me standing there with $42 in my account. A notice in my glove box. And a promise whispered through clenched teeth. You'll regret this. I said it so softly I wasn't sure if it was for them or for myself. But I meant every word. Logan always had a way of being the center of gravity. Even when everything around him was falling apart. He wasn't the smartest. Or the most disciplined. But he walked into every room like he owned it, and somehow convinced people he did. From the time we were kids, he was the star. The one with the spark. I was the quiet one. The one who cleaned up after his tantrums and smoothed over his messes when he didn't show up. The first time Logan lost investor money. Dad told him it was a learning experience. The second time, Mom said true visionaries fail forward. By the third, they'd mortgaged part of the house to cover his debts, calling it a short-term setback. I was 19 then, working the front desk at a hotel after class. eating canned soup in a dorm I could barely afford. While they threw Logan a relaunch party with shrimp platters and custom-printed swag, he dropped out of college his sophomore year. Said it was too slow for him. They told me to stay the course. That I needed structure. When Logan crashed the BMW my parents gave him, they bought him a better one, with backup cameras and leather seats. When I cracked my laptop screen, I had to save tips for 4 months just to replace it. They used to say I was too sensitive, that I read into things. But even now, I can still hear them at dinner, talking about Logan's brilliant mind while ignoring the fact he hadn't paid taxes in 2 years. Meanwhile, I was tutoring underclassmen and applying for scholarships. No one even noticed I won. Logan's failures never stuck to him. They slid off like water on wax. Tech startup, real estate app, cryptocurrency fund. Every single one crashed. And every time, he came home with a smile and a story. They always believed him. They called it potential. Me, I had to explain every dollar I spent, every absence, every grade that slipped below an A. When I tried to tell them I was drowning, they said I wasn't working hard enough. When I finally got a scholarship to an out-of-state design program, Mom told me it sounded more like a hobby than a career. It was during Gran's final months that I saw it most clearly. Even as she lay in the hospital, Logan still found ways to turn the moment toward himself. He called it a wake-up call, as if her dying was about his clarity. He brought a pitch deck to her bedside, asked for feedback while she struggled to speak. She was too kind to tell him no, but she pulled me aside one afternoon, her voice fragile but fierce, and said she'd made things clear in her will, that I'd be taken care of, that she was sorry she hadn't said it sooner, that she was proud of me. I never told anyone. It was my one quiet promise that maybe, finally, someone saw me. So when I found out the money was gone, that it had all gone to Logan's new idea, I didn't just feel robbed. I felt erased. Like she'd never spoken those words to me at all. Like they'd managed to silence even her final truth. The confrontation wasn't planned. I just drove. Held that letter from Gran and those bank statements like they were armor. I walked through the door of my parents' house, the one with the polished floors and the framed pictures of Logan at every milestone, and I asked for the truth. They looked at me like I was the one making things ugly. Like I was the problem. Dad kept his voice low. Told me I didn't understand how things worked. Mom didn't even bother with excuses. She said the money was better used for Logan. That I didn't have the vision or the resilience to make it grow. I asked how they could just take what wasn't theirs. How they could ignore everything Gran said. Mom looked at me with that quiet, cutting look she always used when I disappointed her. She said I needed to grow up. That life wasn't fair. That some children were investments, and some were expenses. I don't remember deciding to yell. I just remember the way my voice cracked as I asked if they forged Gran's signature. If they used her death as a way to pad Logan's next failure. That's when she hit me. Open palm. Clean across the face. The sting was sharp but familiar. She'd done it when I was younger. When I talked back. When I cried too loud. She told me to leave. Said I was embarrassing myself. And like always, Dad stood behind her. Silent. Like he'd never had a say in anything that happened in that house. As I stood outside with my heart pounding, I realized something even worse than the betrayal. I had no one left to fight for me. Gran was gone. And whatever family I thought I had, they'd chosen Logan. Just like always, the first night in my car didn't feel real. I parked 3 blocks from my old campus. Just far enough from anyone who might recognize me. I used a hoodie to block the window, curled into the back seat of my Civic, and stared at the ceiling until morning crept in through the cracked sunroof. The silence felt heavy, like I'd slipped through a crack in the world. And no one noticed. My car became a system. I had spots for everything: backpack on the passenger seat, toiletries in the glove compartment, clothes folded tight behind the driver's side, I kept baby wipes in the console. A plastic bag for trash on the floor. Every item had its place because it gave me the illusion of control. Mornings meant public restrooms. I knew which gas stations didn't ask questions. I'd brush my teeth quickly, splash cold water on my face, and fix my ponytail in the scratched mirror above the sink. My eyes always looked tired, but I trained myself to smile like I wasn't breaking. I charged my phone at the library and stole Wi-Fi from coffee shops. I applied to jobs non-stop. Sent a digital resume while pretending I had a real mailing address. When I got an interview call, I practiced answers in my head, sitting upright in the back seat like it was a cubicle. The trick was to sound put together, like I had somewhere to go back to after the call ended. One time, during a phone screening, a guy asked if I could hear construction in the background. I said my building was getting remodeled. What I didn't say was that I was parked next to a Home Depot for the free Wi-Fi and the closest thing to a sense of safety. Charlotte found out after 12 days. I showed up at her door in the same jeans I'd worn for a week, hoping she wouldn't ask questions. She didn't. She made coffee and waited. I told her it was temporary. She offered her couch. I said no. She said she'd cover first month's rent somewhere. I said no again. I wasn't trying to be proud. I was just afraid. Afraid that if I leaned on someone, I'd never learn how to stand again. She slid a cup across the table and told me I couldn't keep living like this. I wrapped both hands around the warmth and said I'd figure it out. The truth was, I didn't have a plan. Just stubbornness and a printed newspaper ad for an assistant opening at a small design firm. I didn't care about the title or the pay. I just needed a door to open. Even if I had to knock with dirt under my nails and clothes pulled from a trunk, I wasn't looking for comfort. I was looking for a chance. And I wasn't going to let anyone say I hadn't earned it. The office was smaller than I expected but impossibly clean. Walls of frosted glass. Scent of lemon polish and steel. I could hear my boots scuffing against the tile with every step. Loud in a place where everything seemed designed to whisper. My hands were clammy, gripping my portfolio so tightly the corners had bent. I smoothed them as I waited, forcing myself to sit still. Rita walked in like she owned gravity. Her suit was tailored to perfection. Heels silent. Expression unreadable behind cat-eye glasses and a face that had likely never cracked under pressure. She didn't smile when she shook my hand. Just nodded once. Like she was already calculating whether I was worth the time. "Your resume is interesting," she said, flipping pages with long, manicured fingers. I'd scrubbed every trace of the last 2 weeks off my body, but I could feel the weight of it clinging to me. The shower from Charlotte's apartment. The borrowed blazer. The sleepless night spent practicing lines in a rearview mirror. She paused on a gap in my experience. "Family emergency," I said, keeping my voice level. I had to take time off. She didn't respond, just stared at me for a beat too long. Then she tapped a glossy thumbnail against the corner of my portfolio. "This is rough, but some of it's promising." That word felt like a crack in a wall. I leaned in slightly. "Hopeful." She caught it, and the corner of her mouth moved almost a smirk. Almost approval. "The pay is minimum wage," she said. "Long hours. High turnover. Most assistants quit within 3 months." I met her eyes and said I wouldn't. Something in my voice must have reached her. Maybe it was the kind of tired that doesn't go away after a nap. Maybe she'd heard it before. She closed the folder and stood. "You start Monday. Don't be late." I nodded, trying not to let relief turn into tears. I walked out of that office with nothing but that promise and a creased manila folder pressed to my chest. But it was more than I'd had yesterday. And it was enough. The first month at the firm was all elbows and silence. I organized fabric swatches by color, texture, and SCO. I fetched coffee, carried blueprints, and relabeled boxes of tile samples until my hands cracked from the dust. I said yes to everything. Every errand. Every task. Every Saturday. The assistance before me had lasted weeks. I made it a point to be invisible until I was indispensable. Rita didn't praise. She nodded, occasionally paused mid-stride to point at a mistake without explaining it. I learned fast. If she pointed once, it meant fix it and don't ever do it again. I watched how she walked through rooms like they were already finished in her head. I started staying late to rewalk those rooms in my own shoes, memorizing how she saw things. At night, when the office emptied, I studied catalogs, magazines, floor plans from old projects buried in the archive drawers. I sketched in the margins of napkins and invoices, took photos of fixtures and drew them from memory in my car. I watched how light hit different surfaces through the windows as the day shifted. I noticed what made a space feel expensive even when it wasn't. No one noticed at first. Or maybe they did. And they were waiting for me to slip. But I didn't. I couldn't afford to. This job wasn't just work. It was proof I still belonged somewhere. Even if I had to earn every inch of ground by bleeding under fluorescent lights. Eventually, Rita stopped giving me instructions and started leaving post-it notes. Things like Rito layout. Or wrong ratio on this shelf. And once, just once, finally, that note stayed tucked in my wallet for months. I began anticipating needs before she spoke them. If a vendor was late, I already had a backup on the line. If a client wanted marble, I could tell them which batch matched their paint swatches under soft light. I was the first in and last out. And no one had to tell me I'd earned that. One night, after everyone had gone, Rita came back into the office. I was still reorganizing the materials library. She stood there for a long time, arms crossed, eyes scanning my neat new system of labeled drawers. "You work like someone who has something to prove," she said without turning. "I do," I answered quietly. She didn't respond, just nodded once and walked out. And that was when I knew I was finally building something they couldn't take away. Not money, not approval, but skill, value, a future crafted with my own hands. The day I opened my own studio was the first time I felt like I was finally in control. It wasn't much a converted garage with peeling paint and a crooked door, but it was mine. I set up a folding table, plugged in an old laptop, and spread blueprints across a battered desk. The air smelled of sawdust and fresh paint, a scent that meant possibilities. My first big project was a rundown Victorian that no one else wanted. The floors creaked, the windows were cracked, and the garden was wild with weeds. I moved in while I worked, sleeping in an unfinished bedroom and making meals on a hot plate. Every day was a battle against the chaos. But I loved it. The house was my canvas and my sanctuary. I learned every squeak and shadow, every stubborn nail and drafty corner. I stayed up late sketching, reading, imagining how the old bones of the house could be reborn. When the renovation was done, I sold it for enough to buy 2 more properties. It wasn't just a sale, it was proof that I could build something lasting. The studio grew slowly from that garage. Just me, a laptop, and a stubborn vision. I didn't have clients yet, but I had purpose. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't surviving, I was thriving. Every blueprint, every paint sample was a step away from the girl who'd lost everything. It was quiet, but it was victory. The ocean breeze drifted through the open windows of my coastal home, carrying the faint scent of salt and cedar. The mansion sat perched on cliffs that overlooked endless waves, a place I had only dreamed about in the darkest nights. Light spilled across marble floors and bounced off hand-painted silk wallpaper. It was quiet here, a peace I had earned with every blistered hand and sleepless night. Clients came and went, each one trusting me to transform their spaces into reflections of their lives. I had a waiting list that stretched months ahead, names whispered in the kind of circles I never imagined belonging to. But none of that made me forget where I started. The creaking floors of that first Victorian, the cramped garage office, the nights spent sketching by the glow of a single lamp, Sometimes I'd sit on my terrace with a cup of coffee and think about Gran. How she'd have smiled at this. How she believed in me long before anyone else did. The distance between that girl in the car and the woman watching sunrise over the ocean felt like a lifetime. Yet despite the success, a quiet restlessness lingered beneath the surface. I had won in many ways. But something was still unsettled. The silence in the halls sometimes felt like a reminder of what was taken and what I still had to face. But for now, I let the waves soothe me. The salt air fill my lungs, and the calm settle deep inside. I was finally home. And I was finally ready for whatever came next. The morning news flashed across the screen. And there he was, Logan. Older, but with the same practiced charm that had fooled everyone for years. The headline blared fraud investigation. Millions lost. Investors devastated. I sat frozen. Coffee cooling in my hand as the weight of it settled in my chest. After all the lies and betrayals, the inevitable had finally caught up to him. Hours later, I heard the familiar sound of a car pulling up the driveway. I opened the door to find my parents standing there. Worn and smaller than I remembered. Their expensive clothes hung loose. Faces drawn and eyes avoiding mine. They came empty-handed. Stripped of the pride that once filled their presence. They asked if I could help. If I could take them in. The same people who had thrown me out. The same people who had taken everything. For a moment, he hesitated. But then I stepped aside, letting them pass, not because I forgave them, but because I was ready to rewrite the rules. This time, the house was mine, and they would live by my terms. I was no longer the girl who begged for scraps of love and money. I was the one who decided who belonged and under what conditions. And the reckoning was just beginning. The east wing of my estate had been untouched since I bought the place. Bare bulbs dangled from exposed wiring. Dusty wooden floors creaked underfoot. And the wallpaper peeled in quiet protest. It was nothing like the polished halls and marble fireplaces they were used to. When I told my parents they could stay there, I saw the flicker of disbelief cross their faces. I handed them keys without a word and laid out the rules. No phones. 1 meal a day. Early lights out. Manual labor was mandatory. The unfinished wing was their new home. And every cracked floorboard and dusty corner was a reminder of what it meant to lose everything. Their designer clothes hung awkwardly against the faded walls. And the silence between them was heavier than any conversation could be. My mother flinched at the first creak of the floorboards. My father tested the thin mattress, as if hoping it might somehow transform into the plush bed he once owned. I watched quietly as they moved through the space. Their steps hesitant. Unsure. This wasn't just about a roof over their heads, it was a lesson. The kind you can't teach with words or warnings. The kind only experience can deliver. In the kitchen, I left them a simple meal, 1 slice of toast, each reminding them of what I endured when they cast me aside. They ate silently. Faces drawn. I saw pride start to crack. I saw humility, begrudging and raw, begin to take root. This was their reckoning. Not loud. Not dramatic. But steady, like the slow drip of water wearing away stone. And I was patient enough to watch it all unfold. The first morning, I collected their phones at the door without a word. No exceptions. The silence that followed was louder than any argument could have been. My mother's lips pressed into a thin line, eyes darting nervously like a caged animal. My father simply handed over his phone and nodded, already resigned to the new order. Breakfast was at 7 sharp, 1 piece of toast on each plate. I watched as they picked at it, faces flushed with discomfort. The weight of hunger was nothing new to me. But to them, it was a foreign, unwelcome visitor. Afterward came the real test. I handed them gloves and gardening tools, pointing toward the overgrown rose garden. My mother flinched when the prickly thorns snagged her designer gloves. My father's hands shook as he tried to steady a shovel, the muscles unfamiliar with manual labor aching after just minutes. They grumbled, whispered complaints, barely audible. But they didn't stop. They couldn't. I was watching. And I was satisfied. There was a dark humor in seeing them struggle with tasks they once hired help to do without a second thought. The polished elegance gave way to sweat. Dirt under nails. And muscles protesting every movement. I caught my mother grimacing as she wiped dirt from her cheek. Mascara smudged and useless against the heat and effort. This was justice in motion. Not loud, not vengeful, but real. The kind of justice that breaks down walls and builds something new in their place. Watching them learn what it meant to work for every crumb was a relief I hadn't expected. And in that garden, under the blazing sun, I finally felt a measure of peace. I met Isabel at a quiet cafe, off a side street. The kind of place where nobody looked twice, and the walls held more secrets than the people inside. She slid into the booth across from me. Eyes shadowed, and hands trembling slightly, as she placed a USB drive on the table. The weight of it felt heavier than the device itself. She didn't waste time. This contains everything. She said emails. Financial records. Private messages, proof of Logan's lies. Manipulation. And the destruction he left behind. I listened. Heart pounding. As she detailed how one of the investors, a woman named Sarah, took her own life after losing everything to Logan's schemes. Isabel's voice caught when she spoke about Sarah's pregnancy. Logan knew and pressured her to terminate if she wanted her money back. When Sarah refused, he systematically destroyed her career and her spirit. Isabel confessed she'd stood by him for years, blinded by love or fear, until the weight of guilt became unbearable. The hardest part came when she told me my mother knew. She'd caught Logan threatening Sarah, but said nothing, just told him to be more discreet. That silence was complicity. I could feel the room close in around me as I struggled to breathe through the shock. Isabel's eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I deserve this. We all do." I didn't respond. I stared at the USB, knowing that inside it held the proof that could finally unravel the web Logan and my family had spun around me. The truth was heavier than anything I'd ever carried. But this time, it was mine to wield. Dinner that night felt less like a meal and more like a reckoning. The air was thick, heavy with unsaid words and memories clawing to surface. I set my laptop on the table and opened the file without a word, letting the silence stretch before I pressed play. Logan's voice filled the room, calm, menacing, the kind of poison that seeps slowly but kills for good. He warned Sarah she had 24 hours to comply or face ruin. Her trembling replies were barely audible over his cold promises. I watched my parents' faces pale, as the truth they'd buried came alive in front of them. "You're not just guilty of theft," I said, voice steady but sharp. "You enabled this. You protected him. And now it's going to the FBI. Unless you cooperate fully." My mother's fork clattered against her plate. My father swallowed hard, eyes darting away. They tried to deny it, but their silence was confession enough. I didn't need their words. I had the proof. And for the first time, the power. This was no longer just about money or inheritance. It was about justice. And I was finally the one writing the rules. Each day followed a strict rhythm I set without compromise. 1 meal a day. No exceptions. Manual labor from dawn until dusk. Whether it was weeding the garden or organizing the garage, I watched them closely, keeping track of every misstep, every complaint that dared slip through their lips. The same way they once watched over me, except now I held the leash. My mother's hands trembled as she tried to keep up. My father's back bent with exhaustion, but neither one dared show weakness. I reminded myself this was justice, not cruelty. Still, there were moments when the weight of it pressed on me more than it did on them. One afternoon, as my father bent to lift a heavy stone, his knees buckled beneath him. He collapsed to the ground with a sharp gasp, clutching his chest. Panic surged through me, sharp and sudden. As I dropped everything and rushed to his side, The harsh lines of anger softened in that instant. I helped him inside, steadying his shaky frame and fetching his medication. The man who had once been so cold now looked fragile. Human. I realized justice wasn't about breaking someone entirely. It was about holding them accountable. Yes, but also knowing when to offer mercy. That day, as I sat beside him while he caught his breath, I understood that the line between revenge and justice is thinner than we think. And sometimes, the strongest power is in choosing compassion even when you have every reason not to. I uploaded the video late at night, hands trembling as I hit send. The screen refreshed with a confirmation. And suddenly the weight of years of silence lifted, replaced by a sharp, electric rush of finality. Within hours, every major news outlet had picked up the story. Headlines blazed across screens, with my family's name splashed in bold letters. I watched the footage play back. Logan's threats and my parents' complicity no longer secrets but public record. The quiet house was filled with the sound of distant sirens as the FBI arrived, agents moving methodically through rooms that once held only secrets. I could see my parents on the news, their faces drained and hollow, stripped bare before a nation that now knew the truth. There was no turning back. The empire they'd built on lies was crumbling, brick by brick, under the weight of exposure. And as the cameras rolled, capturing their shame and surrender, I finally felt a peace that had nothing to do with revenge. Justice had landed, not with a bang, but with the steady, unstoppable force of truth. The New Horizons Youth Center wasn't just a building, it was a promise. A place where kids who had been abandoned, ignored, or forgotten could find something they desperately needed: hope. I poured myself into every detail, from the faded walls that needed fresh paint to the worn-out furniture that begged for repair. Each brushstroke, each corner cleaned, was a step toward healing, not just for the kids but for me. My parents arrived on the first day wearing the uniforms of community service workers, their faces a mix of shame and uncertainty. They moved slowly through the rooms, unaccustomed to the rhythm of this new world. I assigned them to tasks that made them confront the realities they once turned away from: organizing supplies, tending to the garden, painting walls. Their hands trembled as they held brushes. Their eyes no longer filled with arrogance, but something quieter: regret. I named the nursery after Sarah, the investor who lost everything and whose life was stolen by the greed they enabled. It was a small tribute to a life that deserved more than silence. For me, it was a reminder that even in loss, there could be meaning, that, from destruction, something beautiful could grow. The kids who came through those doors carried their own wounds, but in their laughter and questions, I saw resilience reflected back at me. They chose colors for their rooms, made the space their own, breaking through the hardened shells they'd built for survival. Watching them reminded me why this fight was worth everything. This was not revenge. It was redirection. A way to take the pain they caused and turn it into something lasting and good. I wasn't interested in breaking my parents forever. I wanted them to understand the power of rebuilding, the weight of responsibility, and the cost of neglect. In those moments, standing among fresh paint and hopeful eyes, I felt a peace I hadn't known was possible. The arc of my story was no longer about what was taken from me but what I chose to give back. And in that giving, I finally found freedom. I stood back and watched my parents paint the wall, their strokes slow and hesitant, the vibrant colors a stark contrast to the shadows they carried. They worked not as the people who once controlled me, but as volunteers in a place that held the broken pieces of so many forgotten lives. I didn't feel forgiveness stirring in my chest, not yet. That was a mountain I wasn't ready to climb. Instead, I felt something quieter but no less powerful: freedom. Freedom from the weight of their choices, from the chains of their betrayal. I was no longer tethered to their approval or their failures. I had built a life that belonged to me, piece by piece, color by color. Some wounds don't heal with time or apologies. They remain tender, a reminder of the lessons learned and the boundaries set. And that's okay. Because sometimes the bravest thing is not to forget, but to remember without letting the pain define you. I whispered to myself what I wish someone had told me long ago. Sometimes the hardest walls we build are the ones that keep us safe. And when you decide to stand on your own, you discover a strength no one can take away. This was my story, my truth, and my peace. Not because I forgave them, but because I chose myself